In the early hours of the morning, my phone lit up with a text message from my own son. It read, "Dad, plans changed. You are not coming on the cruise next week. Monica wants only her family there." The very next day, I canceled the payments, sold the house they lived in, and left town. When they came back from their luxurious vacation, the house they thought they owned was gutted to the studs. Before I dive into exactly how I systematically dismantled their perfect little lives, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach an entitled family member a harsh lesson in reality. My name is Harrison Caldwell. I am 70 years old, and for 40 years I ran a ruthless construction contraing business right here in Seattle. It was a Tuesday, 6:00 in the morning. The Seattle sky outside my window was still that heavy wet gray that clings to the city for months. I was sitting at my kitchen table, nursing a black coffee. The house was quiet. It had been painfully quiet for 3 years, ever since my wife Diane passed away. I was just staring at the empty chair across from me, thinking about her when my phone buzzed on the cold granite countertop. It was a text from Derek, my 34-year-old son, a man I had broken my back on construction sites to provide for. I picked up the phone expecting a simple question about our upcoming trip. Maybe a question about the flight times or the luggage tags. Instead, the words on the glowing screen hit me like a physical blow to the chest. "Dad, plans changed. You are not coming on the cruise next week. Monica wants only her family there." I just sat there in the dim light of the kitchen. I read the message over and over again, trying to make the letters mean something else. "You are not coming on the cruise. Monica wants only her family there." My chest tightened. Let me give you some necessary context so you understand exactly what I was looking at. This was not a cheap weekend getaway to a local resort. This was a 10-day ultra-luxury Alaskan cruise. I had paid exactly $45,000 for it, putting the entire amount on my personal platinum credit card. I did not ask my son or his wife for a single dime. I paid for it because I wanted to honor Diane. Alaska was the one place my wife had always wanted to visit, but we never made it because I was always working, always building, always pouring every ounce of my energy into securing a financial empire for Derek. When she died, I promised myself I would take our son on that trip to celebrate her birthday. I booked the owner's suite, the absolute best room on the entire ship, a sprawling luxury suite with panoramic ocean views, a private balcony, and personal butler service. I even prepaid for helicopter tours over the glaciers, while I booked it for all of us. Me, Derek, and his 31-year-old wife, Monica. I wanted us to be together. I wanted to share that profound memory with the only family I had left in this world. And now my son was sending me a cowardly text message at 6 in the morning, casually uninviting me from my own $45,000 gift, simply because his wife wanted her family there instead. A cold, heavy silence filled my kitchen. I set my coffee mug down. My hands were perfectly steady. When you spend 4 decades managing massive construction sites, dealing with corrupt suppliers and lazy foremen, you learn very quickly that anger is a completely useless emotion. You do not throw tantrums, you fix the problem. I tapped Derek's name on my screen and hit the call button. I held the phone to my ear, listening to the dialing tone. It rang once, twice, then the line went completely dead. He rejected my call. My own son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders, the man whose expensive college tuition I paid in full with cash, was too much of a coward to even speak to me. Derek had always been spineless. He had gladly traded his mother's tough love upbringing for Monica's manipulative absolute control over his life. I took a deep, stabilizing breath, steeling myself, and dialed the number a second time. This time, someone picked up, but it was not Derek. "Hello, Harrison." It was Monica. Her voice was hushed, tightly controlled, and dripping with that fake, elegant politeness she always used when she was about to say something completely toxic. She did not call me Dad. She rarely did. I kept my voice perfectly level, hiding the storm brewing inside me. "Put my son on the phone, Monica." She let out a small, dramatic sigh, clearly annoyed that I was pushing the issue. "Derek is in the shower right now." "Harrison," she said smoothly. "And honestly, there is really nothing to discuss. He sent you the text. The plans have changed." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the bleak sky outside. "Monica," I said slowly, choosing my words with absolute precision, "that is a $45,000 trip. I booked the owner suite for us to celebrate Diane. You do not just change the plans and uninvite the person who paid for the entire ticket." I could hear her shifting on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of running water in the background, proving Derek was hiding. Then she delivered the words that completely shattered whatever fragile illusion of family we had left. "Look, Harrison," she whispered, her tone hardening into something deeply condescending. "My parents have never been on a luxury vacation in their entire lives. They really deserve this experience. Plus, my brother Bradley is coming too. Let us be honest here. Older people like you get sick at sea so easily. It is a huge liability. You would just be tired and complaining the whole time. My parents are in much better shape to actually enjoy the owner suite." I closed my eyes. The sheer audacity of this woman was staggering. She was hijacking my generous gift, my hard-earned money, and my deeply personal tribute to my dead wife, to use as a private all-expenses, paid luxury vacation for her own parents and her deadbeat brother. People who had never contributed a single cent to her life, let alone ours. I stayed utterly silent on the line and letting her disrespectful words hang in the empty air. Monica took my calculated silence as a victory. She thought she had won. She thought she was dealing with a tired, lonely, clueless old man who would just roll over and accept the massive disrespect because he was desperate for family connection. "We will make sure to buy you some nice souvenirs from the ports, Harrison," she added, her voice dripping with artificial pity. "Just stay home, relax, enjoy the quiet time alone. We will see you when we get back." And before I could say a single word in response, she ended the call. The line went dead, leaving me alone in the dark kitchen. The line went dead, leaving me alone in the dark kitchen. I slowly pulled the phone away from my ear and set it down on the cold granite island. For a long minute, I simply stood there, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. The sting of Monica's voice still echoed loudly in my head. "Older people like you get sick at sea so easily. You would just be tired and complaining the whole time." In a different life, maybe a different man would have screamed in anger. Maybe he would have violently thrown his coffee mug against the wall, called his son back repeatedly, and demanded a tearful explanation. But I did none of those things. When you spend 40 years running a commercial construction business in Seattle, you learn to process betrayal differently. You do not survive 4 decades of dealing with corrupt suppliers, corner-cutting foremen, and brutal contract negotiations by throwing a helpless tantrum. In my line of work, when a foundation cracks or a massive steel beam buckles under heavy pressure, you do not cry about it. You pull the blueprints, you inspect the structural integrity, and you systematically locate the rot. Then you tear it out with unforgiving precision. I calmly walked out of the kitchen, leaving my coffee untouched on the counter, and made my way down the hall to my private study. The wooden floorboards creaked softly beneath my feet, a highly familiar sound in a house that felt suddenly entirely too empty and incredibly cold. I sat down at my heavy mahogany desk, flipped open my laptop, and waited patiently for the screen to cast its pale blue glow across the quiet room. I needed to see the exact damage for myself. I opened my personal email and quickly found the original booking confirmation from Royal Caribbean. It was a massive receipt, $45,000 charged directly to my personal platinum credit card without a second thought. I remembered the specific day I booked it, sitting right here in this very chair. I had looked at a framed photograph of Diane on my desk, her smiling face from a trip to the coast many years ago, and I had felt a profound sense of purpose. I was buying us a beautiful, lasting memory, a grand, sweeping tribute to the wonderful woman who had held our entire family together. I had carefully selected the owner suite, the absolute crown jewel of the ship, because I truly wanted Derek to experience the kind of extravagant luxury I had worked my entire life to provide. I highlighted the long booking reference number, copied it to my clipboard, and navigated to the official cruise line passenger portal. My hands did not shake as I steadily pasted the code into the secure login field. I hit the enter key. The loading icon spun for a few agonizing seconds, a small blue wheel turning round and round before the detailed reservation page finally populated on the monitor. I stared blankly at the bright screen. I blinked, leaning much closer, my eyes rapidly scanning the detailed passenger manifest. I scrolled down to the primary guest details section, fully expecting to see my name, Harrison Caldwell, listed prominently first, as the primary account holder and lead passenger. My name was completely gone. It was not moved down to a secondary cabin. It was not downgraded to a standard interior room. It was completely surgically erased from the entire digital system. In the exact space where my name absolutely should have been boldly occupying the master bedroom of the massive owner's suite was the name Richard Sterling. Right below him was Margaret Sterling, Monica's parents. The very people who had spent the last 5 years making thinly veiled, highly arrogant comments about my blue-collar background, constantly judging the rough calluses on my hands at every single Thanksgiving dinner, were now the primary occupants of a $45,000 luxury suite I had personally paid for. My chest grew tight, a painfully cold knot of realization rapidly forming deep in my stomach, but I deliberately forced myself to keep scrolling. There were 2 more passengers attached to the active reservation, Derek Caldwell and Monica Sterling. That made 4 people. The owner's suite was perfectly designed to hold 6 people comfortably. I looked carefully at the final passenger slot, the one that absolutely undeniably should have belonged to me. Instead, I saw the name Bradley Sterling. Bradley, Monica's 32-year-old brother, a profoundly lazy man who had completely dropped out of 2 different local colleges, who had been rightfully fired from 3 different entry-level jobs I had personally secured for him as massive personal favors, and who currently lived rent-free in his parents' basement, actively playing video games all day long. This fully grown adult man, who had never bothered to buy me so much as a cheap cup of coffee, was now officially registered to casually enjoy the private balcony, the personal butler service, and the premium evening dining packages that I had financed with my own blood, sweat, and decades of grueling physical labor. They had not merely uninvited me. That alone would have been intensely cruel. But this was something entirely different. They had actively logged into my private secure account, deliberately hijacked my paid reservation, and selfishly replaced me with the entire Sterling family. They had completely stolen my deeply personal gift to use as a highly private all-expenses, paid luxury family vacation for greedy, terrible people who meant absolutely nothing to me. I sat back deeply in my leather chair, fully letting the sheer horrifying magnitude of the betrayal completely wash over my tired bones. Monica had intricately orchestrated this entire scheme. I knew her ruthless tactics perfectly well. She was an absolute master of silent, deeply toxic control, constantly framing her immensely selfish demands as acts of necessary medical care and profound emotional empathy. She had probably convinced Derek that I was simply too old, too fragile, or too painfully depressing to be around on a fun party trip. She had likely spun an elaborate, highly convincing narrative where taking her family was somehow a tremendous favor to me, gracefully sparing me the extreme physical exhaustion of extended travel across the ocean. And Derek, my spineless, completely cowardly son, had eagerly let her do it. He had willingly allowed his deeply manipulative wife to actively log into the reservation portal, manually delete his deeply grieving father's name, and freely hand over a small fortune in luxury travel to his horrible, condescending in-laws. He had stood by totally silently while they completely, ruthlessly hijacked a highly sacred trip, explicitly meant to deeply honor his own mother's lasting memory. The betrayal was so incredibly profound, so deeply calculated and viciously malicious, that it instantly and permanently stripped away absolutely any lingering paternal weakness I might have foolishly held on to. I looked intensely at the specific booking details once again. The massive cruise ship was officially scheduled to fully depart in exactly 7 days next Tuesday. The official boarding passes were already actively generated and saved. The specialized luggage tags were physically printed. The incredibly expensive premium drink packages were already manually selected. I could clearly see on the screen that Bradley had already happily gone in and successfully upgraded his personal beverage package to the absolute ultimate tier, happily granting him unlimited daily access to incredibly expensive top-shelf liquor. All of these excessive, deeply arrogant charges were linked directly and continuously to my personal platinum credit card, which was incredibly still dutifully stored deeply in the ship system as the primary default payment method for absolutely all ongoing onboard expenses. They actually thought they had finally won. They truly deeply believed they had successfully and completely outmaneuvered me. Monica had smugly sized me up and quickly, foolishly decided I was just a highly tired, deeply broken old man who would quietly and obediently absorb the massive, horrible disrespect, who would obediently stay home and sadly accept her profoundly fake pity, simply because I was far too desperate for my son's eventual meager affection to ever cause a major messy scene. She arrogantly thought my heavy silence on the phone earlier was the pathetic, completely submissive silence of a totally, utterly defeated man. She did not actively understand exactly who she was foolishly dealing with. She did not logically understand that a seasoned man who spent 40 incredibly grueling years successfully dominating the highly brutal, entirely unforgiving world of commercial corporate contracting absolutely does not simply quietly surrender his hard-earned personal assets. I absolutely did not build massive, expensive skyscrapers by carelessly letting greedy, terrible people steal my incredibly expensive raw materials. I positively did not successfully amass my large personal wealth by foolishly allowing lazy, deeply entitled parasites to quietly and constantly drain my private bank accounts without extremely serious, highly devastating consequences. I stared intensely at the glowing screen, quietly tracing the arrogant names of the entire Sterling family with my small digital cursor. An incredibly slow, deeply chilling clarity smoothly and completely settled entirely over my busy mind. The profound sadness was entirely gone now, completely instantly evaporated smoothly into the cold morning air. In its absolute place was a highly sharp, intensely focused, heavily tactical, purely destructive energy. I deliberately reached for the yellow legal notepad I constantly kept perfectly centered, firmly on my wooden desk, quietly clicking my heavy metal pen. I actively started writing down a highly detailed, extremely precise list. I absolutely did not quickly cancel the extremely expensive cruise tickets right then. That exact move would have been entirely too simple, far too incredibly easy. That specific choice would have only been a mere, highly temporary inconvenience for them to eventually fix. I desperately, completely wanted them to happily pack their highly expensive designer bags. I fully wanted them to happily drive together to the busy, crowded port. I positively wanted them to successfully board that massive luxury ship fully, feel the fresh, cold ocean breeze, and fully deeply experience the highly arrogant thrill of their totally stolen victory. I intensely wanted them safely, completely trapped on that massive metal ship. I confidently closed the silver laptop with a highly quiet, beautifully definitive, extremely satisfying snap. The fragile foundation of our entire family had not just slightly cracked under pressure. It was entirely rotten to the very core, and it was exactly time to absolutely bring the whole heavy structure down. My smartphone vibrated against the hard granite surface of the kitchen island, breaking the heavy silence of the early morning. I looked down at the bright screen. The caller identification displayed Derek's name in bold black letters. It had been exactly 22 minutes since Monica had abruptly hung up on me. 22 minutes of absolute silence, while my son presumably gathered the tiny fraction of courage required to finally face his own father. I let the phone vibrate 3 separate times. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to sit in the uncomfortable tension of his own cowardly actions before I granted him an audience. On the 4th long ring, I reached out and slowly swiped the green icon to accept the call. I brought the device to my ear and simply breathed, waiting for him to speak first. I did not offer a warm greeting. I just let the empty dead air press heavily against his guilty conscience. "Dad, are you there?" Derek's voice came through the small speaker. It was noticeably shaky, thin, and stretched incredibly tight with nervous anxiety. "Yes, Derek, I am here," I replied. My voice was completely flat, entirely devoid of any warm parental affection. It was the exact same tone of voice I used to use when dealing with a highly dishonest concrete supplier who thought he could safely cut corners on a massive commercial building project. I heard my son swallow hard over the line. "Listen, Dad." He started immediately stammering over his own carefully rehearsed words. "I am really sorry about how all of this is suddenly coming out. Monica did not mean to sound harsh on the phone earlier. It is just that we are dealing with a highly sensitive, very complicated medical situation right now." I remained completely silent, forcing him to desperately fill the uncomfortable void. "Monica has been struggling with severe clinical depression for the last few months," Derek continued, his voice dropping into a hushed, dramatically serious whisper. "Her licensed therapist strongly suggested that she desperately needs a completely stress-free, entirely supportive, emotional environment to properly heal. The medical professional specifically recommended that she spend some quality, uninterrupted healing time with just her immediate family. Willed her parents and her brother know exactly how to manage her delicate emotional triggers." I listened to this pathetic, meticulously constructed lie absolutely pouring out of my 34-year-old son's mouth. The sheer level of sophisticated manipulation was genuinely staggering. They were actively weaponizing the concept of mental health to casually justify stealing a $45,000 luxury vacation. I knew perfectly well that Monica was not suffering from severe clinical depression. Just 3 days ago, I had personally seen her wildly celebrating with a large group of her loud friends at an incredibly expensive downtown Seattle restaurant, drinking premium cocktails and laughing until she could barely stand up. This entire therapy narrative was an incredibly convenient, perfectly timed excuse, uniquely designed to paint me as the villain if I dared to object to their outright theft. "It is just for her mental health, Dad," Derek pleaded, sounding increasingly desperate for my blind validation. "You know how important family support is during a major psychological crisis. We did not want to burden you with her heavy emotional baggage on what is supposed to be a fun, relaxing trip. You would just be stressed out trying to accommodate her strict dietary needs and her therapy schedules. It is honestly much better for everyone if you just stay home and relax in peace. We fully intend to pay you back for your specific ticket eventually. Once our personal finances stabilize a bit, we will set up a monthly payment plan to slowly reimburse you for the money. Please, Dad, just try to understand our incredibly difficult position. Please do not ruin this important healing journey for us by getting unnecessarily angry." I closed my eyes, feeling a profound, heavy wave of utter disappointment completely wash over me. I thought about my late wife, Diane. She had been a fiercely strong, incredibly resilient woman who absolutely believed in the strict, unforgiving concept of personal accountability. When Derek was a teenager, if he ever tried to avoid taking direct responsibility for his own foolish mistakes, Diane would confidently march him straight back to the scene of the problem and force him to look the offended party dead in the eyes while he delivered a genuine apology. She raised him with tough love, trying to mold his soft clay into a solid, dependable man. But the devastating truth was that Derek had always been inherently weak. He had absolutely zero structural integrity. The very moment he left our strict household and met Monica, he had eagerly and completely surrendered his own spine. Not he actively traded his strong, demanding mother for a deeply controlling, heavily manipulative wife who expertly dictated his every single move. I knew with absolute terrifying certainty that Derek was currently standing in a quiet corner of his massive house, reading directly from a specialized mental script that Monica had drilled into his head just minutes before. He was nothing but a frightened puppet, dutifully reciting his master's lines. He actually believed that dangling the vague, entirely empty promise of a future payment plan would magically pacify my mounting rage. He genuinely thought that mentioning a fictional long-term reimbursement schedule for a massive $45,000 credit card charge would successfully blind me to the immediate reality of their vicious betrayal. I knew perfectly well that I would never see a single dime of that money from them. They lived entirely beyond their actual means, constantly drowning in superficial debt just to maintain a highly curated, profoundly fake image of extreme wealth on their various social media profiles. The idea that they would suddenly develop the sharp financial discipline required to slowly pay back tens of thousands of dollars was an absolute laughable fantasy. But I did not point out the glaring logical flaws in his pathetic story. I did not loudly demand to see this supposed therapist's official medical notes. I did not scream about the blatant, horrific disrespect of replacing my name with Bradley's name on a trip designed to honor my dead wife. Instead, I smoothly leaned into the carefully constructed lie. I deliberately forced every single trace of anger, betrayal, and sorrow completely out of my voice. I took a slow, deep breath, perfectly mimicking the gentle, deeply understanding tone of a highly sympathetic, thoroughly defeated old father who simply wanted his son to be happy. "All right, son," I said softly. My voice was smooth, quiet, and completely non-threatening. "If Monica is truly struggling with such a severe, complicated medical issue, then of course she needs to be surrounded by her own parents. Mental health is incredibly important. I completely understand why you had to change the passenger details so abruptly. You do not need to worry about me. I will be perfectly fine staying here at the house. Just focus entirely on taking good care of your wife and making sure she gets the peaceful, healing environment she desperately needs." There was a sharp, sudden intake of breath over the phone line. I could literally hear the massive, incredibly heavy weight of profound anxiety completely lifting right off Derek's shoulders. The absolute relief in his voice was palpable, almost sickeningly sweet. "Really, Dad?" he asked, his tone instantly shifting from desperate panic to bubbling, highly arrogant excitement. "You are not incredibly mad at us. I mean, I know it is a huge, sudden change of plans, and I was so deeply worried you would completely blow up at me over the financial aspects of the tickets. I am not mad at all, Derek." I lied effortlessly. My face was a cold, expressionless mask of pure stone. A father's only job is to properly support his son during difficult times. You go on your trip, enjoy the fresh ocean air, have a wonderful, relaxing time with the Sterling family. We can easily discuss all the boring financial details and the specific reimbursement plans whenever you get back to Seattle. There is absolutely no rush. "Thank you, Dad," Derek gushed, completely, falling into the massive invisible trap I had just perfectly laid out for him. "You are the absolute best. Seriously, this means the entire world to Monica and me. We will definitely bring you back something incredibly nice from the glaciers." I have to go help Monica finish packing the last of her specialized therapy items, but I will text you right before we board the ship next week. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, son," I replied calmly. "Have a very safe and highly memorable journey." I pulled the phone away from my ear and deliberately ended the call. The screen went completely dark, reflecting my own hard, unsiling face in the black glass. Derek had eagerly bought the entire performance. He genuinely truly believed that his clueless, overly generous old father had completely swallowed their pathetic fairy tale, without a single moment of critical hesitation. He was likely walking back into his master bedroom right now, proudly flashing a victorious smile at his heavily manipulative wife, confidently assuring her that the stupid old man was successfully handled and safely out of their way. They thought they had securely won the absolute ultimate prize, They confidently believed they were about to embark on the most incredibly luxurious, entirely free vacation of their entire superficial lives. But they were completely, catastrophically wrong. The real war had not even officially begun yet, and my deeply arrogant son had absolutely no idea that he had just casually handed me the exact tactical ammunition I desperately needed to thoroughly, systematically destroy his perfectly curated, profoundly fake life. I sat in the absolute silence of my study, slowly steepling my fingers together, entirely ready to initiate the next devastating phase of my response. I sat in the absolute silence of my study, slowly steepling my fingers together, entirely ready to initiate the next devastating phase of my response. The heavy mahogany clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking the slow passage of time. Suddenly, the quiet atmosphere was shattered by a sharp vibrating buzz from the smartphone resting on my desk. The screen illuminated the dim room with a harsh white light. I leaned forward and picked up the device, fully expecting another text message from Derek, perhaps a hollow apology, or another carefully crafted lie to ensure I was completely pacified. Instead, the notification banner displayed the bright blue logo of my primary financial institution. It was an automated security alert. My brow furrowed in mild confusion. I swiped the screen to unlock the phone and opened the secure banking application. The alert was directly tied to a specific checking account, one that I rarely monitored because it was explicitly meant to remain completely dormant. It was a joint emergency checking account that I officially shared with Derek. This account was a deeply sentimental relic from a completely different era of our lives. Many years ago, when Derek first moved out of our family house to attend college, my late wife Diane had firmly insisted that we establish a shared financial safety net for him. Diane was an incredibly loving mother, but she was also exceptionally practical and fiercely protective. She wanted to ensure that if our only son ever found himself in a genuine crisis, a sudden medical emergency, a major car breakdown, or a catastrophic living situation, he would have immediate, unquestioned access to liquid funds without having to wait for banking hours or cross-country wire transfers. I had initially argued against the idea, firmly believing that a young man needed to learn how to actively manage his own financial hardships to build real character. But Diane had looked at me with those piercing, uncompromising eyes and quietly demanded that we provide him with a silent, permanent pillar of financial security. I dutifully deposited a very generous sum of cash into that specific account and effectively forgot about it. Over the passing decades, even after Derek successfully graduated, found a lucrative corporate career, and eventually married Monica, I never bothered to officially close the account or remove his name from the authorized user list. I simply kept a substantial cushion of liquid cash resting in the vault, quietly honoring my sacred promise to Diane to always provide a safe harbor for our child. For years, the balance had remained entirely untouched. Derek clearly knew the strict rules of the arrangement. The money was exclusively reserved for absolute life-altering emergencies. I slowly tapped the push notification, prompting the mobile banking application to instantly load the detailed transaction history for the joint emergency account. The digital screen refreshed, and my eyes locked onto the bold black numbers proudly displayed at the very top of the ledger. My heart skipped a remarkably heavy beat. The total available balance had been drastically and completely reduced. I frantically scrolled down to the recent activity section, my vision rapidly narrowing on the most recent line items. There, glowing with stark digital clarity, were 3 back-to-back cash withdrawals. Each individual withdrawal was for the exact same incredibly specific numerical amount, $9,900. I stared intensely at the bright screen, letting the cold mathematical reality completely wash over my racing mind. 3 consecutive transactions of $9,900 flawlessly executed within mere minutes of each other, efficiently pulling a massive total of $29,700 of raw, untraceable cash directly out of my private emergency reserves. The warm blood in my veins instantly turned to absolute ice. As a hardened man who spent 40 grueling years actively managing highly complex commercial construction budgets, aggressively dealing with massive union payrolls, and skillfully navigating strict corporate banking regulations, I knew exactly what that highly specific number meant. You absolutely do not withdraw exactly $9,900 from a bank by mere coincidence. In the United States financial system, any single cash transaction of $10, 0 Zen or more automatically triggers a mandatory currency transaction report directly to the federal government. It is a strictly enforced legal requirement specifically designed to aggressively monitor and routinely prevent illicit financial activities and criminal money laundering. By deliberately and carefully keeping each individual cash withdrawal just exactly $100 under that major legal reporting threshold, whoever physically took the money was actively engaging in a highly calculated, deeply illegal financial maneuver commonly known as structuring. They were intentionally, maliciously bypassing sophisticated federal monitoring systems. They desperately wanted to pull a massive, life-changing amount of liquid cash completely out of the banking system without ever generating any official corporate banking flags or prompting any automated security phone calls to the primary account holder. They were not simply stealing my expensive luxury vacation to Alaska. They were actively, systematically draining my liquid financial assets while simultaneously feeding me a pathetic, entirely fictional, emotional soba story about Monica supposedly suffering from severe clinical depression. The profound sheer audacity of their multi-layered criminal deception was physically sickening. Derek had literally just spent 10 long minutes on the telephone, practically begging for my deepest paternal sympathy, emotionally, describing his wife as a fragile, deeply troubled woman who desperately needed a peaceful family retreat to simply function in society. All the while, they had already brilliantly orchestrated a highly illegal, heavily calculated extraction of nearly $30, zeroed in completely untraceable cash. I placed the phone down on the wooden desk, my breathing perfectly even, but my mind operating at a terrifying hypervigilant speed. Why would a married couple living in a beautiful, extremely expensive Bellevue mansion ever desperately need $30,000 in raw physical cash? You absolutely do not use unrecorded stacks of $100 bills to pay for normal legitimate household expenses like utility bills, premium groceries, or luxury car insurance. You do not need carefully structured physical currency to comfortably enjoy a paid luxury cruise vacation where absolutely every single premium amenity is neatly linked to a digital cabin card. Untraceable cash is exclusively gathered and utilized for only one specific purpose. It is purposely used to secretly pay for highly illicit goods or incredibly shady under-the-table services that cannot ever legally leave a permanent paper trail. My son was not just a weak, pathetic coward who had allowed his terrible wife to casually disrespect his grieving father. He was now an active, incredibly brazen participant in a major financial conspiracy aimed directly at my personal wealth. The intricate pieces of the dark puzzle were finally clicking together with devastating clarity. The sudden cancellation of my cruise ticket, the inclusion of Monica's highly questionable family, the deeply manipulative, thoroughly rehearsed phone call, and now the massive, highly illegal structuring of cash withdrawals from an account. They genuinely thought I was entirely too old and completely too oblivious to actively monitor. They had truly crossed the point of no return. I absolutely had to uncover exactly why. I closed the banking application on my phone and pushed my leather chair back from the mahogany desk. The quiet morning air in my study felt suddenly heavy, thick with the undeniable reality of my son's deceit. $30, zeros in structured cash withdrawals was not a simple misunderstanding. It was a massive, deliberate maneuver to bypass federal banking security, executed by someone who desperately needed untraceable funds. I needed to see Derek face to face. I needed to look him directly in the eyes and see the truth for myself. I stood up, grabbed my heavy wool coat from the hallway closet, and walked out the front door into the crisp, gray Seattle morning. I climbed into my truck and started the engine. The drive from my quiet neighborhood to the upscale suburbs of Bellevue usually took about 30 minutes across the floating bridge, but today the journey felt like an eternity. The rhythmic thumping of the tires over the concrete expansion joints matched the furious beating of my heart. As I navigated the winding, tree-lined streets of Bellevue, the modest homes gradually gave way to sprawling multi-million-dollar estates. The neighborhood was an exclusive enclave of manicured lawns, pristine private driveways, and towering evergreens. It was a place designed for profound comfort and absolute security. I turned the steering wheel and slowly approached the specific cul-de-sac where Derek and Monica lived. I did not pull directly into their expansive driveway. My gut instinct, honed by decades of dealing with highly deceitful contractors and hostile business negotiations, warned me to remain completely unseen. I drove past their property, parked my truck discreetly 2 full blocks away, and turned off the ignition. I sat in the silent cabin for a moment, simply staring at my calloused hands resting on the steering wheel. I stepped out of the vehicle and began the short walk down the pristine sidewalk. The cold morning air bit at my face, but I barely felt it. My mind was entirely focused on the massive structure standing at the end of the street. It was a stunning modern architectural masterpiece, valued at $2.2 million. I knew the exact appraisal value because I was the one who had purchased the property. When Derek and Monica were first married, they had endlessly complained about the soaring cost of living and their inability to afford a decent home in a safe neighborhood. I wanted to give my only son the ultimate head start in life, a solid foundation that I had to fight tooth and nail to build for myself. I had bought the Bellevue estate entirely in cash. I did not want them burdened by a suffocating 30-year mortgage or crippled by fluctuating interest rates. However, my veteran business sense had prevailed over pure parental emotion. I legally placed the entire property into a strict revocable living trust. I retained ultimate control of the deed, but I allowed them to live there completely rent-free. I even paid the exorbitant annual property taxes and the hefty homeowners association fees out of my own pocket. I provided them with a flawless, luxurious existence, totally free of any housing expenses. All they had to do was maintain the property and build their lives. And now they were using the absolute financial freedom I provided to systematically steal from me. As I approached the edge of their manicured property line, I stayed close to the tall privacy hedges, deliberately avoiding the sweeping line of sight of their front door smart camera. The sheer audacity of their deception tasted like bitter ash in my mouth. I slipped quietly through the side gate, my boots making virtually no sound on the damp paving stones. I bypassed the grand front entrance and made my way to the discreet side door that led directly into the spacious 3-car garage. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my heavy brass keyring. I smoothly selected the silver master key, a spare I had explicitly kept for major maintenance emergencies. I slid the key into the deadbolt. With a slow, highly practiced motion, I turned the lock. The well-oiled mechanism clicked open with barely a whisper. I gently pushed the heavy fireproof door open and stepped inside the cavernous garage. I stood in the center of the cold concrete floor for a few long seconds, allowing my eyes to fully adjust to the dim artificial light. The sprawling garage was a pristine, meticulously organized monument to their deeply unearned, highly excessive lifestyle. Monica's pristine white luxury SUV and Derek's expensive imported sports car sat gleaming under the overhead lights. Both vehicles had been purchased with funds I had generously provided under the guise of early inheritance gifts. I remembered writing the massive checks for those luxury vehicles, falsely believing I was genuinely helping them securely establish a completely stable life. Now those cars looked like pure trophies of theft. The air inside smelled faintly of expensive leather interior polish and premium motor oil. I closed the side door behind me, ensuring the latch caught silently. The house above me was not empty. Even through the thick, insulated ceiling of the garage, I could clearly hear the distinct muffled sounds of active movement, footsteps pacing rapidly across the hardwood floors, the sharp, heavy thud of large objects being dropped, and voices. I heard their voices echoing faintly through the ventilation ducts. I moved slowly toward the interior utility stairs, a narrow secondary staircase that led directly up to the back hallway near the sprawling master suite. I placed my hand on the wooden railing and began to climb. I placed my boots carefully on the very edge of each wooden step, expertly shifting my body weight to avoid making a single creak. I ascended into the residential level of the house, blending perfectly into the dark shadows of the narrow rear corridor. The sounds from the master bedroom became incredibly clear. They were not packing in a frantic, depressive panic. They were openly celebrating. I heard Monica let out a sharp, genuine burst of laughter, a joyful sound that directly contradicted the elaborate story of her severe clinical depression. I stood perfectly still in the protective darkness of the hallway, my back pressed firmly against the cool, plastered wall. Through the partially open door of the master suite, I could see the bright morning light spilling across the imported Italian rugs. I could hear the distinct rhythmic zipping of heavily overstead luggage. They were dragging massive hard-shell designer suitcases across the floor, casually discussing which expensive formal outfits to bring for the exclusive captain's dinner. My chest burned with a profound, icy fury. There was absolutely no medical emergency. There was no desperate need for a quiet, healing family retreat. They were simply packing for a highly extravagant, incredibly expensive luxury vacation that they had ruthlessly stolen directly from my grieving hands. I held my breath, narrowing my focus, and silently listened as the true, horrifying depths of their sinister betrayal finally began to unfold right in front of me. I stood perfectly still in the protective darkness of the hallway. The master bedroom door was cracked open just enough to let a sliver of bright sunlight slice across the expensive hardwood floor. I could hear the distinct sound of a heavy suitcase zipper being aggressively pulled shut. Then came the voice of Monica. It was not the hushed, concerned whisper she had used on the phone with me just hours prior. It was loud, bright, and completely saturated with an ugly, arrogant triumph. She was actively mocking me. I could hear the sneer in her words as she imitated my calm acceptance of her demands. She laughed sharply, telling someone in the room how incredibly easy it had been to get the stupid old man to surrender a luxury vacation. She bragged about how she barely had to push before I rolled over and gave her exactly what she wanted. My jaw tightened. She was proudly describing my profound grief as a massive flaw to be mercilessly exploited for her own personal gain. Another voice joined the conversation, drawing a harsh, greedy laugh from Monica. It was Bradley, the perpetually unemployed brother of Monica, the man whose entire existence seemed strictly dedicated to avoiding any form of honest labor. He was lounging somewhere in the room, likely sitting on the very bed my money had purchased. He eagerly asked if they had the boarding passes fully printed. Then he loudly proclaimed that his primary goal for the entire 10-day Alaskan journey was to systematically drain the ship of its most expensive alcohol. He cheerfully reminded Monica to double-check that the onboard spending account was still solidly connected to my platinum credit card. He vividly described the premium bourbon and the highly exclusive champagne he planned to order every single night, joking that he would drink enough to put me in a shallow financial grave. He actually used those exact words. He was actively salivating over the prospect of bleeding my personal finances dry while sailing on a luxury vessel I had booked to honor the sacred memory of my deceased wife. The profound disrespect echoing through that room was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. As I listened to Bradley joyfully anticipating his stolen luxury, my mind involuntarily drifted back through the long, grueling decades of my life. I thought about the bitter freezing rain of the early Seattle mornings in the late 1970s. I remembered waking up at 4 in the morning, my entire body violently aching from the previous day of labor. I remembered tying my worn leather work boots in the dark, quietly slipping out of the house, so I would not wake a sleeping Diane or a young innocent Derek. I spent 40 long years standing in knee-deep mud, aggressively pouring heavy concrete foundations and hauling massive steel beams until the physical cartilage in my lower spine was practically ground into dust. I permanently ruined my own back, sacrificing my own physical health for one single unwavering purpose. I wanted to ensure that my only son would absolutely never have to struggle the way I did. I wanted to build a massive, impenetrable financial fortress so Derek could securely live a beautiful life, completely free from the crushing anxiety of poverty. Diane and I had sacrificed every single personal luxury so that boy could have the world. And there he was, my son, the ultimate product of all that grueling sacrifice. He was standing in that bedroom completely silent, while his deeply manipulative wife and her parasitic brother openly mocked the man who had given him absolutely everything. He was a coward, a weak, spineless shadow of a man who lacked the fundamental moral courage to defend his own father. But the truly devastating part, the moment that actively shifted this entire situation from a case of profound greed to something incredibly dark and deeply sinister, was about to happen. The loud sound of the luggage zipper stopped. The room fell relatively quiet for a few brief seconds. Then Derek finally spoke. His voice was completely devoid of any joy. It was tight, nervous, and heavily laced with a profound, cowardly hesitation. He did not ask them to stop making fun of me. Instead, he asked a question that made the blood freeze entirely solid within my veins. "Are you completely sure about the legal papers?" Monica Derek asked. His tone was a pathetic, fearful whisper, but it carried perfectly into the dark hallway where I stood. I could clearly hear the nervous shuffling of his feet against the floorboards. I mean, doing this while we are out on the ocean miles away from everything. It feels like a massive risk. We are talking about fundamentally altering his entire life. He is not actually losing his memory. Monica, we both know that he just misses Mom. He is just sad. The absolute gravity of those specific words hit me like a runaway freight train. Legal papers losing his memory. My breathing completely stopped. I stood frozen in the cold shadows, my hands slowly clenching into tight, rigid fists at my sides. Derek knew I was perfectly fine. He actively acknowledged that my mind was sharp and that my only real affliction was the profound grief of losing his mother. Yet he was questioning a legal strategy based on a completely fabricated medical premise. Monica did not offer him any comfort or any moral reassurance. She instantly snapped at him with a tone so incredibly vicious and sharply commanding that it made me physically recoil. She demanded to know if he was foolish enough to simply wait around until I inevitably decided to change my estate planning. She aggressively reminded him that I held the absolute legal power to alter the terms of the family trust at any given moment. She coldly asked him if he wanted to risk watching me leave the entire family fortune to a random charitable foundation out of spite. Then she loudly stated that her parents' own personal medical doctor had already officially signed the preliminary evaluation documents. She proudly declared that this highly corrupt, heavily compensated medical professional had explicitly put in writing that I was currently exhibiting severe, undeniable signs of advanced cognitive decline and early-onset Alzheimer's disease. The sheer horrifying magnitude of their coordinated conspiracy crushed the last fragments of my paternal denial. The 3 recent bank withdrawals of $9,900 were not just for luxury shopping or paying off random consumer credit card debt. That cash was actively used to illegally bribe a medical doctor and quietly secure falsified psychiatric evaluations. They were not merely stealing a vacation. They were constructing a sophisticated illegal medical trap to completely strip away my human rights, seize my financial assets, and forcibly lock me away in a facility against my will. I stood completely frozen in the dark corridor, my heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm of absolute unforgiving war, as I finally realized with total terrifying clarity that my own flesh and blood had just officially signed the irreversible legal paperwork for his own permanent and total financial destruction. The suffocating silence in the hallway was suddenly broken by Monica's venomous voice. She did not coddle my son's sudden burst of moral conscience. She actively attacked it. Do you honestly want to wait around until your senile father casually decides to change his mind? She hissed, her tone slicing the quiet air like a cold razor. Do you want to patiently sit here until he rewrites his entire will and leaves every cent of his estate to some random charity out of pure spite? We have already paid for the legal groundwork, Derek. My parents' personal physician has already officially signed the preliminary medical evaluation. The paperwork clearly states that Harrison is actively showing severe, undeniable signs of advanced Alzheimer's disease. I stopped breathing. The floorboards beneath my boots felt as though they were giving way. Alzheimer's. The sheer terrifying weight of that specific word hung heavily in the air of the house I had purchased with my own blood and sweat. It was the most insidious, deeply cruel lie a person could possibly fabricate. My mind was incredibly sharp. I still actively managed my own complex investment portfolios and vividly remembered the exact day I poured the concrete foundation for the first commercial building of my career. Yet, my own daughter-in-law was casually discussing a falsified medical diagnosis, as if she were simply planning a weekend grocery shopping trip. Suddenly, a blinding flash of realization hit me. The banking alerts from earlier this morning. The 3 consecutive cash withdrawals of exactly $9,900 from our joint emergency checking account. I had initially suspected they were simply using the structured untraceable cash to secretly purchase luxury goods or pay off hidden consumer debts. But the dark truth was exponentially worse. That heavily structured $30, zeroed in raw cash, was specifically used to illegally bribe a deeply corrupt medical professional. They had brazenly used my own financial assets to quietly purchase a completely fraudulent psychiatric evaluation from a doctor embedded in the Sterling family network. The remaining cash was undoubtedly handed under the table to whatever completely unethical attorney they had hired to secretly draft the sinister legal documents without raising official red flags. They were successfully financing my own legal and medical execution using the very money I had painstakingly saved to protect my son from genuine hardship. Derek stammered, his voice vibrating with a pathetic, deeply sickening cowardice. But what if the probate judge wants to actively question him? Monica, what if the court officially demands a secondary medical opinion from a totally independent neurologist? He is going to fight back. You know my dad. He never simply surrenders when he is backed into a corner. Monica let out a highly arrogant scoff that echoed chillingly down the narrow staircase. He is not going to have the chance to fight back, Derek, she replied smoothly, her voice dripping with dark, malicious confidence. That is exactly why we are leaving on this cruise tomorrow morning. While we are safely floating in the middle of the ocean, completely unreachable and totally removed from the situation, our attorney is going to officially file the petition for emergency guardianship with the county court. The judge will clearly see the signed medical affidavit from a licensed physician. I leaned my heavy shoulders against the cool plaster wall, closing my eyes and listening intensely as she carefully outlined the final, incredibly devastating phase of her highly illegal and totally unforgivable master plan. And when the court predictably asks for a pattern of recent erratic behavior, Monica continued, her tone practically vibrating with smug, victorious pride. We will simply present them with the undeniable fact that he deliberately abandoned his own highly expensive family vacation at the very last possible minute. We will convincingly argue that his mental state has rapidly deteriorated to the point where he is a severe danger to himself, suddenly isolating himself from his loving family and refusing to leave his empty house. It is the absolute perfect narrative. By the time our luxury cruise docks back here in Seattle next week, the emergency court order will already be fully processed. We will simply have the medical transport team quietly waiting at his front door. He will be safely transitioned into a secure memory care facility for his own good, and we will assume total immediate legal control over the entire revocable trust. This $2.22 million house, the vast investment portfolios, and all of his liquid cash accounts will finally officially belong to us. The sheer calculated perfection of their sinister trap was genuinely breathtaking. They had actively used my profound grief over Diane's passing to paint me as a deeply unstable, reclusive old man. They had cleverly manipulated me into voluntarily skipping the cruise, effectively transforming my quiet, dignified retreat into the final piece of manufactured evidence required to legally steal my fundamental human rights. If I had simply stayed home oblivious to their dark conversation, I would have woken up next week to the terrifying sight of medical orderlies forcing me out of my home and locking me away for the rest of my natural life. They were willing to legally bury me alive to accelerate their inheritance. My chest completely stopped hurting. The profound, suffocating sorrow that had heavily weighed down my tired heart since I first read Derek's text message at 6:00 in the morning completely evaporated into thin air. There was absolutely no trace of paternal love left inside my body. The man standing in that master bedroom was no longer my son. He was a dangerous, heavily compromised liability. He was an active, willing participant in a highly sophisticated, deeply malicious conspiracy specifically designed to completely strip away my freedom, my dignity, and my hard-earned legacy. I simply did not need to ever hear another single word from them. I silently pushed myself away from the hallway wall, ensuring that the heavy fabric of my winter coat did not brush against the wooden doorframe. I placed my boots with absolute surgical precision on the exact edges of the wooden stairs, silently reversing my path down into the dim garage. My breathing was incredibly slow, remarkably deep, and completely entirely controlled. I felt a sudden, massive surge of cold, highly focused energy completely flood my veins. It was the exact same intensely familiar feeling I used to get when I stepped onto a highly chaotic, heavily delayed commercial construction site and realized I had to ruthlessly fire the entire management crew and actively rebuild the failing structure from the absolute bare ground up. I slowly and silently slipped out the side door of the garage, feeling the cold morning wind immediately hit my face. I walked the 2 long blocks back to my parked truck, my strides incredibly long and completely purposeful. I quickly climbed into the driver's seat and firmly gripped the heavy leather steering wheel. The time for any silent, crippling grief was entirely over. They had officially declared war, and I was going to deliver a financial and legal slaughter so profoundly devastating that their precious sterling family name would be permanently ruined. The drive back across the Interstate 90 floating bridge was a blur of gray concrete and driving rain. The heavy tires of my truck hummed a steady, monotonous rhythm against the wet asphalt, perfectly matching the cold mechanical processing of my own thoughts. I did not drive back to my empty, silent house. I drove directly into the dense, towering heart of downtown Seattle. The towering glass and steel skyscrapers loomed overhead like massive, unforgiving sentinels as I navigated the slick, crowded streets. I pulled my truck into the subterranean parking garage of a sleek, high-rise office building, cut the engine, and took one final, incredibly deep breath. The raw, visceral sting of absolute betrayal had completely subsided, replaced entirely by a profound, terrifying clarity. I was no longer a grieving widower, and I was no longer a forgiving father. I was a man actively fighting for his own fundamental survival. I stepped out of the elevator on the 42nd floor and walked purposefully through the heavy glass doors of Reed Sterling and Vance, one of the most ruthless and highly respected corporate law firms in the entire Pacific Northwest. The receptionist, a sharply dressed young woman who had known me for over a decade, immediately recognized the hard, unyielding expression on my face. She did not bother asking if I had a scheduled appointment. She simply nodded quickly, picked up her desk phone, and quietly pressed a single button. Within seconds, the heavy mahogany door at the far end of the plush corridor swung open. Mitchell Reed stood in the doorway. Mitchell was a 68-year-old legal shark, a man whose tailored Italian suits barely concealed the predatory instincts of a highly aggressive courtroom brawler. He had been my personal attorney, my trusted confidant, and my closest friend for over 35 years. He was the man who had expertly drafted every single ironclad contract for my construction business, fiercely protecting my wealth from countless corporate predators. Mitchell took one look at my posture, stepped aside, and silently ushered me into his expansive corner office. He closed the heavy door behind us, ensuring the locking mechanism clicked firmly into place. The room was a monument to legal intimidation, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a sweeping panoramic view of the dark churning waters of Puget Sound. He did not offer me a drink or ask me how my morning was going. He walked directly over to his massive oak desk, sat down in his high-backed leather chair, and fixed his piercing gray eyes directly on me. "You have that exact same look on your face that you had 20 years ago when you ruthlessly fired your entire executive board," Mitchell said, his voice a low, growly rumble.